Eruvin Daf Lamed, today's letter was accompanied by a beautiful gift, a tabletop stender from Eichler's from R Yosef Shalom. Some of us know him as Harry Shalom from Los Angeles. Dear Belly, thank you so much for teaching me Gemara and Masechta Shabbos. You've had tremendous impact on my life and learning, and I highly doubt I'll ever be able to repay you. Every day I get an enormous amount of inspiration from you and your shir and all you do for myself and the DY family and Klal Yisrael. Baruch should bless you with strength to continue to spread Torah throughout the world and to continue Machayil Chayil until Mashiach comes. Amen. Thank you so much, Reb Harry Aaron Yosef Shalom. Thank you so much. So Eruvin Daf Lamed discusses the shir of 2 meals, as we were discussing the other day. What if it's something that comes together with bread? Let's say peanut butter. So it's whatever you eat for 2 meals, the bread, and that amount that you add to the bread. So it's a very small amount. But it's something that you eat by itself, like meat, then the shir is whatever it takes for 2 meals. Raw meat, the amount that you would eat for 2 meals. If it's roasted, we have a machlokes. Rabbi says the amount that you would eat together with bread, which is a very small amount. And according to Rabbi Yosef, whatever you eat on its own, and he brings a raya from the Parsim. They wouldn't eat bread, they go to the shmor, they just eat the meat straight, they don't want to waste any room on bread, and therefore, if the Parsim do it like that, that is the shir for everybody. Abai says no. We go by the individual. For instance, when we're talking about tumah on garments, well, it depends. If the person is wealthy, the garment is 3 by 3 tefachim. If a person is poor, it's 3 by 3 fingers. It goes by the person. Eruv, we go lekula, and that is if a person is sick, Rahman al-Snani, can't eat that much, so his suit is much smaller. If a person is a rafton, he's a fresser, he eats a lot, then we don't go by him. We go by the average meal because most of the people eat a certain way, and batla daitoi, and therefore most of the world eats roasted meat with bread, therefore the shir is much less. The halacha is, by oil hameis, if there's a dead person in a room, everything in the room becomes tamei. Halachically, l'chayra, anything behind the door, outside, should not be tamei. However, the halacha is, if it's within the jam, it's tamei if that's where you're going to take the dead person out. Since he's going to go out through that way, that door becomes tamei, and not the other doors. If you know that he's only going to go out through that door. According to Rav Shimon Elazar, if a guy is tremendous, like Oig Melech Habasha, you need a doorway his size in order to make the other doors not tamei. And Abai says, don't bring a raya from Oig Melech Habasha, because what are we supposed to do? Cut him up into small pieces. Over there, it's a fact that you're going to have to enlarge the door. According to Rabbi Yochanan, even somebody the size of Oig Melech Habasha only needs a doorway of 4 tefachim in order to pater the other doors and say that they're not tamei. And Abai explains, because if they're smaller doors, it logically makes sense that he's going to enlarge the largest one, which is the 4 tefachim one. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that you make an eruv from 1 egg. There's a girsa here that he doesn't argue. And Sinai, which is Rav Yosef, says 2 eggs. So perhaps Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak agrees with that according to the Marashal. We learned in the Mishnah that you don't make an eruv with water and salt. Why? Because they don't give sustenance to the body. But all other foods give sustenance to the body. So that would be a big question on Rav and Shmuel Masechtas Brachos, who say you only make boyer minei mezainos on the 5 grains, because mezainos to give sustenance is only from 5 grains. Rav Huna will explain that over here it's a case where he says hazon alai, anything that gives me sustenance, and therefore that's why you make an error with that. But if a person says kaina mazain, then it will only be mazain, which is the 5 grains. The fact that Rabbi Yochanan, the famous Gemara in Brachas, that he ate peres genoiser, 1,000 of them, and he swore afterwards, he says, this doesn't give me sustenance, we must say that it's not pshat, it doesn't give sustenance. It just doesn't satisfy him, because all other foods, we said, do give sustenance. Rav Huna makes a distinction. If a person says, I swear I won't eat this bread, he can make an eruv with that bread. Like we said in the Mishnah, he can make an eruv with wine if a person is a nazir. But if a person says, Kikar zu alai, in other words, alai is a lashon of, I won't have any hana from this, so I won't even make an error from it, and he actually brings a raya from Rebbe Eliezer. This is a machlokes what Rebbe Eliezer said. One of the shittas is that Rebbe Eliezer says if you say alai, you cannot make an error with it. But in the Braisa obviously argues on the shita, and if a person says, Kikar zu alai, what he means to say is, it's as if he said, I won't eat it, and if a person says, I won't eat this bread, you're permitted to make an Eruv with that. If a person says this bread is hegdish, no one can make an Eruv with it because no one can eat from it. So we learned in the Mishnah that you can make an Eruv out of wine if a person is a Nazir. There are actually 4 shitas. 2 of them are in Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says in the Brisa that the food that you're making the Eruv with has to be food that you yourself could eat from. So therefore, a Nazir cannot make an Eruv out of wine. There's another shita in Beis Shammai that in order to make an Eruv, it's very, very difficult. You would have to bring all your belongings there, especially belongings that you're going to want to use on Shabbos. And if those belongings that you want to use on Shabbos are not there at the place where you're kind of shvisa, where you're putting the Eruv, it's not an Eruv. Beis Hillel say, if someone in the world can eat this food, then it's a good Eruv. It doesn't have to be you. And Sumcha says, if there's any way that you could get to eat the food, let's say you could say, go to a Rav and say, I don't want to be a Nazir anymore. And they'll say, okay, mutter lach, you're allowed to drink wine. Then even now that you're a Nazir, you're allowed to make an Eruv with that wine. But according to Sumchos, when it comes to Truma, you can't go to the Rav and ask him to change the Truma. Why? You could, but not in this case, because we're talking about during Bein HaShmashos. Before Bein HaShmashos, then there's no question. On Shabbos, you can't do it. So during Bein HaShmashos, Sumchos is of the opinion that you cannot make Truma, you can't do Truma during Bein HaShmashos, because since you can't do it on Shabbos, so it's a Shvus, it's Issa D'Rabbanan, and anything that's a Shvus, you cannot do during Bein HaShmashos. Sumchos holds as well that everything goes by the individual. So if a person, the Kayan, is doing kmitza, he sticks his hand into the fine flour and it goes like this, it depends on the size of his hand. It's his hand. So a very large hand takes more, a very small hand takes less. The same thing on Yom Kippur, when the Kayan go, he takes both of his hands and he takes from the Ketairas, it's his hand's worth. On Yom Kippur, you can't drink Meloi Lugmab, the size of his mouthful, it's his mouth. And so too, when it comes to Mazin Shtei Sudais, by an Eruv, it goes by his meal. And Reb Shimon Elazar could also hold so, as we said before, that a sick person goes by the amount he could eat. And a raft on a fresser, Bavel Daito, it's a kolada. Beis Hillel had a very good time at the Beis Shammai. Don't you agree that on Yom Kippur you could make an Eruv Tchumim even though you can't eat the meal? Isn't that similar to a Nazir not being able to drink the wine? Yom Kippur, the reason is because a Katan could eat the meal. And Beis Shammai say to Beis Hillel, it's different, because you could eat the meal right before Yom Kippur, whereas the wine, the Nazir can never drink it. A Kayin could place his Eruv in a Beis HaPras, a place where they plowed over a grave so the fragments of bones. Why? Because he could get down on all 4 and blow the bones away. And Rabbi Yehuda says, if people trotted over that place, they walked over it, and the fragments are completely disintegrated, then it's mutter even for a Kayin to just walk there. Have a wonderful day.